Good morning, delegates. The Secretariat would like to remind members of the following mitigation measures that are in place for this meeting. All delegates are required to wear a face covering at all times whilst in public spaces and in the combined conference rooms 1, 2, 3, except when directly addressing the meeting. All staff are also required to wear face coverings at all times. Disposable face masks are available if needed. All delegates are to refrain from direct contact, including handshakes and other physical contact during greetings in recognition of the physical distancing requirements. All delegates should remain conscious of COVID-19 hand sanitizing and contact precautions. All movement and, if necessary, queuing requires 2 meters physical distancing, and delegates are requested to minimize activity until seated in the meeting room. Statements delivered by the representatives who are physically present in the combined conference rooms 1, 2, and 3 will be made from the national seats. With the assistance of the occupational safety and health representatives, the chair will oversee the implementation of the mitigating measures in the course of the proceedings. If at any moment it appears that the guidelines are not being strictly observed, the chair will have no choice but to draw the attention of delegates to these guidelines, or even suspend or adjourn the meeting as needed. Furthermore, I would like to remind delegates attending this meeting that under the new COVID-19 contact tracing, existing building access cards are being used to record presence of attendees in the meeting rooms. In addition to swiping cards to gain access to the UNHQ premises, delegates and UN personnel are also requested to swipe access cards at the entrance of the conference rooms. The information collected will only be used in case of a need for contact-19 tracing and not for any other purposes. The data will be held for a maximum of 28 days. Thank you.
Nous allons commencer.
I think we'll begin our meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order the first meeting of the 54th session of the Commission on Population and Development. At the outset, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you all. I am pleased to see you in this combined conference rooms 1, 2, 3 this morning, notwithstanding the many challenges we still face in the midst of the current COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. It now gives me great pleasure to invite Her Excellency Amina J. Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, to make a statement.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is a pleasure to address this important gathering. We have achieved so many milestones since the International Conference on Population and Development that was held in Cairo, 1994. Over the past 27 years, the world has seen significant improvements in poverty reduction and food security. Health systems have substantially improved, maternal deaths have declined by around 40%, and we've witnessed continuing increases in life expectancy and expanded access to primary education for both boys and girls. Girls and adolescents today are less likely to face child marriage and female genital mutilation. But as we take stock of the progress, the picture is clear. We are far from where we need to be. Too many are still being left behind, unable to fulfill their aspirations or exercise their rights. The Sustainable Development Goals cannot and will not be achieved until women, girls, and young people are able to control their bodies and their lives and live a life free from fear and from violence. We are at a pivotal moment in advancing the Cairo Agenda. The COVID-19 pandemic has devastated livelihoods, exacerbated injustices and inequalities, and threatened decades of development progress. In this context, the Commission's focus on food security and nutrition could not be more timely. Sadly, the work is not on track to eliminate hunger and malnutrition by 2030. Undernourishment was already rising before the pandemic, and the trend has worsened considerably over the last year. Meanwhile, billions of people suffer from multiple and overlapping forms of malnutrition, including micronutrient deficiencies and obesity, and cannot afford healthy diets. The nutritional status of the most vulnerable groups is likely to deteriorate further to the health and socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic. Unless we act now, hundreds of millions of children and adults will face poverty and hunger. Poor nutrition in childhood, adolescence, and during pregnancy risk damage to personal health and development throughout the life course. COVID-19 is also exacerbating food crises caused by conflict, severe climate events, and pest infestations. Just as climate change is threatening the stability of food systems, so do current patterns of food consumption and production drive climate change. The global food system contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, land degradation, and biodiversity loss, among other grave harms to the environment and to human health. By shifting towards sustainable approaches through balanced diets, responsible consumption and production, and fairer distribution of income and food, we can achieve major improvements in food security. The livelihoods of 4.5 billion people are tied to our food systems. For them and for the health of all the world's people, we must seize this moment of potential transformation. Guided by the SDGs, the Food Systems Summit later this year gives us the opportunity to advance in 5 key areas: access to safe and nutritious food, sustainable consumption patterns, nature-positive production, equitable livelihoods, and resilience. Excellencies, across these efforts, we must sustain the ICPD's focus on the rights of women, girls, and young people. Despite the significant contributions of women to food production, they face a higher prevalence of food insecurity than men. Meanwhile, women are facing increased household and community demands due to the pandemic and often must feed their families on reduced incomes. The pandemic exacerbates household stress, putting women and girls at a higher risk of male violence, including their domestic and intimate partner violence. This limits their access to sexual and reproductive health services and undermines their reproductive rights. Access to essential maternal health and nutrition services has become even more constrained. The health and nutrition of adolescents have been compromised as a result of disrupted access to school feeding, and health services. We're also witnessing alarming increases in harmful practices and a steep rise in adolescent pregnancies and child marriages. UNFPA projections reinforce the reality that COVID-19 is a crisis with a woman's face. We must ensure women's full and effective participation in pandemic response and recovery and in all spheres. Excellencies, the adoption of an action-oriented outcome by the Commission will be an important contribution to the implementation of the ICPD Programme of Action and to the Decade of Action for the SDGs. It will also send a strong message to upcoming summits, including the Food Systems Summit. I wish you the very best in your deliberations this week and look forward to the outcomes. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the Deputy Secretary-General for her statement. I now invite the Commission to hear a statement by His Excellency Alpha Barry, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cooperation, African Integration and Burkina Bay Abroad of Burkina Faso. It is a pre-recorded message. Deputy Secretary-General, Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to commend the holding of the 54th session of the Commission on Population and Development in a context that has been marked by the COVID-19 pandemic. Allow me to express here also my condolences to all of those around the world who've lost members of their families or their loved ones because of COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, this 54th session, chaired by my country, Burkina Faso, rolled over the theme of the 53rd session, population, food security, nutrition and sustainable development. Given its importance, but also because of the health crisis that meant that we were unable to address substantial issues during our work last year. We all know full well that the COVID-19 pandemic has shaken our world and will have impacts on entire years of progress in our legitimate quest for social well-being and economic well-being for our people. It has compromised food security around the world. It has undermined recent progress towards eradicating hunger by 2030. It has also disrupted public health programs and school food programs and has jeopardized the work of nutrition programs that are so vital. Today, around the world, almost 3 billion people can no longer afford to eat healthily, and 10 million more children could face acute malnutrition. And there are twice as many people facing acute food insecurity in 2020 when we compare the figures with 2019. Then there is the subsequent deterioration of maternal and infant nutrition, and they have negative effects on learning and productivity. Numerous developing countries have had to face disruptions in global food chains, and as well as a fall in agricultural production. While these food chains have been disrupted in the long term, a fall in economic activity in developed countries has also led to a significant fall in overseas development assistance. Given this critical situation, and in order to address it, it is more urgent than ever that the international community, in a spirit of solidarity, mobilise so that it can find new additional resources and leverage all existing finance mechanisms. In this decade of action and implementation of sustainable development, we all have the duty to step up our efforts to eradicate malnutrition and food insecurity through adopting policies for population and development that are in line with agreed and joint priorities. In addition, it is important to support developing countries by providing them with the necessary technical assistance and strengthening and building their capacity to tackle the immense challenges before them, particularly given the fact that many of them are already vulnerable because of climate change, but also security and humanitarian crises. I would express the wish that the debates that will follow the 4 high-level panels will allow us to take stock of how far we've come. Convinced as I am that new ideas will shed light on our modes of production and consumption, and also focus on the preservation of the environment and climate, the restoration of lands and degraded ecosystems. Ladies and gentlemen, the conclusions of this, the 54th session, are much awaited, inasmuch as they could, without a doubt, enrich our debates for the 3 summits to come, i.e. these are the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, the UN Summit on Food Systems, and a Summit on Nutrition for Growth. In light, therefore, of the importance of this theme, in the current global context, we do ardently wish that this session culminate in consensus on all the delicate issues of population development. And I do hope that we will manage to achieve relevant, unified conclusions that are accepted by all. I am therefore launching an appeal to all delegations to work in this spirit so that our world be better equipped to launch ambitious policies that are in line with our aspirations. To conclude, I would like to thank all of those who, in one way or another, have supported Burkina Faso during its chairmanship, particularly the other members of the Bureau, the co-facilitators, the UNFPA, UNDESA, Department for Economic and Social Affairs, the DGACM, Department for General Assembly and Conference Management, Secretariat, Secretary General, and all other UN bodies. I'd like to thank them for their contribution to the success of this session. As we reaffirm Burkina Faso's commitment to the work of the Commission on Population Development from the United Nations ECOSOC, I wish every success to you in your work. Thank you very much. I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cooperation, African Integration and Burkina Bay Abroad of Burkina Faso for his statement. I am now pleased to invite Dr. Natalia Kanem, Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, to make a statement.
Madam
Executive Director.
Mr. Chairperson, Madam Secretary General, Your Majesty, Queen Mother of Bhutan, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, civil society colleagues, dear friends, it is an honor to address this 54th session of the Commission on Population and Development. Food is fundamental. The ICPD Program of Action called for measures, quote, to strengthen food, nutrition, and agricultural policies and programs, with special attention to the creation and strengthening of food security at all levels, end quote. In observing this year's theme, we must remember that on every continent, whether in development or humanitarian crisis, food insecurity is higher among women and within households. Too often, it is women and girls who eat last and least. Now, what was already bad has been made worse by COVID-19. The pandemic is causing a spike in poverty and consequently food insecurity and undernutrition, which in pregnancy increases the risk of low birth weight babies, obstructed labor, premature births, and maternal and newborn deaths. In short, poor nutrition spells disaster for pregnant women, for breastfeeding mothers and their newborns. In fact, nutrition programs count among the most cost-effective interventions for lifelong health and pandemic or not, delivery of such programs must continue to benefit women and children. While the pandemic has been hard on everyone, older people, migrants, those living with disabilities, indigenous people, and people of African descent, young people facing disrupted education and obstacles to finding work, yet and still, our appeal and our plea is for the understanding that COVID indeed is a crisis with a woman's face, as we see an upsurge in gender-based violence, in child marriage, in adolescent pregnancy, and as barriers are thrown up to the normal protective sexual and reproductive health services. Food scarcity places women and girls in harm's way. It puts them at higher risk of violence, transactional sex, and other forms of exploitation and abuse. We see this in the terrible bargain made when someone vulnerable and hungry exchanges unwanted sex for shelter or food, or when desperate families agree to marry off young daughters. Of the many obstacles that still block women's path to equality, one of the most pervasive is the lack of bodily autonomy, the issue explored by UNFPA in the newly launched 2021 State of World Population Report titled, "My Body is My Own, Claiming the Right to Autonomy and Self-Determination." The report shows that in countries where we have data, nearly half of women lack the power to make their own decisions about whether to have sexual relations with their partner, to use contraception, or to seek health care. Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, the historic International Conference on Population and Development sat in Cairo 27 years ago, and it reached global consensus. Delegates from all regions recognized that health and well-being, including sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, gender equality, and education, are at the very heart of development. This vision has been reiterated in multiple reviews, including the ICPD Beyond 2014 review. This very commission has linked successful implementation of the ICPD Program of Action to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. The Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25 in 2019 reinvigorated the movement, mobilizing political will and civil society and private support to accelerate action on the ICPD agenda and the SDGs by 2030. Today, as we meet under the auspices of this landmark commission, we must show the world that this time, nourishing the aspirations of women and girls, and indeed everyone, will not escape our grasp. Let there be no obstacle to a resounding consensus that food security and nutrition underpin all sustainable development goals and are essential to human dignity and well-being. Food is fundamental. Therefore, end hunger in this decade of action. It is high time to regroup and recommit to a world free from hunger, where all may enjoy good health and live without discrimination and without fear. I wish you productive deliberations this week and look forward to a successful consensus outcome for CPD 54. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Madame la Directrice Exécutive.
I thank the Executive Director of UNFPA for her statement. I now invite the Commission to hear a pre-recorded statement by Mr. Ku Dong-kyu, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the Organization of the United Nations.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's a pleasure to address you at the opening of the 54th session of Commission on Population and Development. We welcome the Secretary General's report on the occasion of this event, and the Commission's work on the multifaceted theme of population, food security, and nutrition, and sustainable development. That theme is central to FAO mission, and it's critical for achieving the 2030 agenda. Agri-food systems lies at the heart of sustainable development. Their transformation is decisive for the unprecedented challenge of nourishing and sustaining close to 10 billion people by 2050. The Secretary General's report highlights 3 critical challenges. Food systems are already existing the planetary boundaries for key resources. Dietary patterns are unbalanced, leading to both chronic and infectious diseases. And the food systems continue to suffer vast inequalities, as evidenced by the persistence of hunger and food insecurity. Billions of people cannot afford a healthy diet and struggle for decent livelihood within and outside agriculture, and in rural and urban areas. FAO projections on the future of food and agriculture highlight that the business as usual scenario is simply not an option. It would lead to acceptable levels of undernourishment, malnutrition, and further environmental degradation. We need to take concrete action to achieve the many goals set out in the 2030 agenda simultaneously. This means addressing and minimizing trade-offs, increase agricultural output while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and natural resources stress, scaling up automation while supporting employment, providing income earning opportunities for all while ensure decent wages and work conditions, benefiting from big data use while warranting collective ownership, openness, transparency, and preventing uncontrolled concentration. To achieve such a transformation, we call on the international community to focus on actions that favor responsible consumption and production patterns to ease pressure on the ecosystem, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and mitigate climate change, encouraging development of sustainable and affordable agricultural technologies, apply the policy that create income earning opportunities, build human capacity, and provide a revenue supplementary where needed, implement arrangement to clarify big data ownership and ensure control, openness, transparency, and confidentiality. Ensure that trade rules for food and agricultural products take into consideration social and environmental impacts, supporting research to identify best practices for improving nutrition, including interventions to address obesity. Ensure that programs, policies to improve food security, nutrition, and social protection benefit women, youth, older peoples, and others living in vulnerable situations. The work of this commission makes a valuable contribution to ongoing discussions on more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems. This includes the high-level political forum on sustainable development and the United Nations Food Systems Summit. Together, we can pave the way for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, a better life, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the Director General of the FAO for his statement. I now invite the Commission to hear a statement by Mr. Gilbert F. Hungbo, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion on the nexus between population, food security, nutrition, and sustainable development. I would like to call attention to the women, children, and men of the rural world. They make up around 3.4 billion of the world's citizens, but a disproportionate number of the poor and the hungry. Around 80% of the world's poorest population and most of the world chronically hungry live in the rural areas of developing countries. And most depend on small-scale agriculture. Small-scale family farmers are the backbone of food supply across all low and middle-income countries. They produce around half the world's food calorie on 30% of its land. Rural people, their economic activities, and the food system we all depend on are especially vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Investment in agriculture not only creates jobs on the farm, it can help farmers adapt to climate change and generate employment in trades and activities such as food processing, transportation, and marketing. The result is more diversified and vibrant rural economies with more resilient populations. Achieving the 17 development goals will depend on creating healthier, more inclusive, resilient, fair, and sustainable food systems. With this in mind, I would like to propose 3 key considerations. Firstly, consider that most rural people contribute in some way to meeting global food demands. It is imperative that food systems create decent livelihoods, especially for small-scale farmers and those involved in food processing, storage, and marketing. Among the important aspects to consider are the financial inclusion of poor rural people, access to technologies, business development services, and training on new sustainable agricultural practices. Secondly, we must recognize the contribution of women to food systems and level the playing field. On virtually every development indicator, including poverty, hunger, education, rural women fare worse than rural men. To ensure no one is left behind, we must champion women's empowerment and ensure rural women have equal access to resources and financing and rights to their lands. We must also address the marginalization of groups, indigenous people, and persons with disabilities. And thirdly, we must look to the future and invest in rural youth. Nearly 1 billion of the 1.2 billion youth aged between 15 and 24 live in developing countries, and 2/3 of them, on those women and men, live in rural areas with high agricultural potential. Too often, young people are marginalized and excluded from decent employment and positions of authority and responsibility. In Africa, where more than half the population is rural, agriculture is expected to remain the biggest source of jobs for the foreseeable future. Rural economies that offer a range of employment options and provide opportunities for the entrepreneurial energy of youth, enabling them to be an engine of growth while also contributing to better food security and better nutrition. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by thanking the Commission for your leadership in taking forward the program of action of the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, and especially for dedicating this annual session to discussions linking the population with food security and nutrition and sustainable development. I wish you all fruitful deliberations in the coming days. Thank you.
I thank the President of IFAD for his statement.
An annonce. The Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Amina Mohamed, will need to depart due to her heavy schedule. We thank her for being with us this morning. Your Excellency, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you. Maintenant,
I now invite Mr. Elliot Harris, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, to make a statement.
Merci bien, Monsieur
vous
le
avez la
Président.
parole.
You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, it gives me great pleasure to deliver these remarks on behalf of Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Liu Zhenmin, at the opening of the 54th session of the Commission on Population and Development. The Commission is charged with advising the Economic and Social Council on population issues, which lie at the heart of a people-centered and rights-based approach to sustainable development. This year's focus on population, food security, nutrition, and sustainable development is very timely. This topic also has a very long history. The fear that food production would not keep pace with global population growth has been a recurrent concern over the past 2 centuries, in reaction to the accelerated growth in human numbers during the industrial era. Predictions of a global food shortage have usually been disproven by the growth in agricultural production worldwide, which has consistently outpaced population increase. However, this success has come at a high cost. Food systems are already exceeding planetary boundaries for key resources and are generating tremendous food loss and waste. Current diets are resulting in premature mortality and heightened susceptibility to both chronic and infectious diseases. Food systems give rise to vast inequalities, as evidenced by the persistence of hunger and food insecurity for hundreds of millions of people. The COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbating challenges to both food security and nutrition. The outlook for the relevant Sustainable Development Goals and targets is somber, particularly as regards those on ending hunger and all forms of malnutrition, and on ensuring sustainable food production systems which are at risk of not being reached by 2030. Dramatic changes will be required to address these issues. Collectively, we have a responsibility to ensure a healthy future for both people and planet. This requires feeding a growing population in a manner that is healthy, equitable, and sustainable. The further implementation of the Programme of Action, adopted in 1994 at the International Conference on Population and Development, can make an important contribution to food security and improved nutrition. Efforts to increase education, prevent child marriage, reduce the number of adolescent pregnancies, and improve access to a nutritious diet and family planning services can help reduce risks to women's and children's health. Nutrition education and assistance can be integrated into programs for general education, social protection, and healthcare, including sexual and reproductive healthcare services. These measures and programs help couples and individuals to decide freely and responsibly the number and the timing of their children, helping to reduce fertility levels and slow population growth in countries with high birth rates. Government policies should intensify efforts to reduce and eliminate unsustainable patterns of consumption and production, and to encourage and facilitate population trends that are consistent with the achievement of sustainable development. Dear colleagues, since its first session in 1947, this Commission has helped to build a global normative framework for addressing population issues in the context of sustainable development. By encouraging an evidence-based discussion, the Commission has drawn attention to the challenges and opportunities related to major population trends, including population growth, population aging, urbanization, and international migration. The Commission demonstrates its continuing relevance by linking population trends to broader development processes and goals. To this end, an outcome of the Commission will make a meaningful contribution to the upcoming Food Systems Summit. In this week, you have a unique opportunity to illustrate the critical linkages between population, food security, nutrition, and sustainable development. The UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, lends its full support to the Commission, together with UNFPA and other UN agencies and partners. We are grateful to the Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, and WFP, as well as to WHO, UNICEF, and UNEP for their many contributions to the preparations for the current session. We are committed to working with Member States to carry forward the many productive suggestions on the future role and organization of the Commission that have been highlighted in recent discussions. In particular, promoting substantive and evidence-based debates on population and development, working more closely with all stakeholders, and strengthening alignment of the Commission's work with the activities of ECOSOC and the High-Level Political Forum. Allow me to congratulate the chairs and the Bureau of the current and previous sessions for the great strides that have been made in this regard. And in closing, let me wish you all a very successful meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Je remercie.
I thank the Assistant Secretary General for his statement. I now invite the Commission to hear a statement, a pre-recorded statement, by Ms. Agnes Kalibata, the Secretary General's Special Envoy for the 2021 Food Systems Summit.
Your Excellencies, colleagues, and friends, let me start by thanking the organizers of this event, the Commission on Population and Development, for inviting me to join you in this annual session. People lie at the heart of sustainable development goals, as well as the creation of equitable food systems. Continued population growth will substantially increase the demand for food supplies and require measures that guarantee sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. The UN projects that our population will grow from the current 7 billion to about 9.7 billion by 2050. Action is required to step up all efforts to transform our food system and stay ahead of this growth. The Secretary General launched the Food Systems Summit to catalyze action and get us back on track. The summit's key priority is to deliver on the 2030 agenda while addressing how we produce, process, and consume food and the impact all this would have on people, planet, and prosperity. At today's annual CPD session, our focus is to understand the relationship between the population, food and nutritional security, and sustainable development. All these factors working in unison will influence and contribute towards the 2030 agenda. As you go into these discussions, I would like you to keep a few things in mind. One, there's sufficient scientific evidence that transforming our food systems is one of the most impactful ways to accelerate achievement of SDGs. Therefore, the sessions you will have the potential to provide key insights to the work of the Commission. Two, people are at the center of all 5 action tracks of our food systems, whether it's access to safe and nutritious food, sustainable consumption, nature-positive production, equitable livelihoods, and building resilience given climate change and all these other things. 3, people will determine what needs to be done, the changes that need to be made, the decisions that need to take place, and the call for commitment, contributions, and action that must prioritize how we safeguard our food systems. This is why the Secretary General envisioned the Food Systems Summit as a people's summit. All stakeholders are invited to engage through national dialogues currently taking place all around the world. The last point I would like to make, our food system and their value chains have potential to help us build back better and to recover from the current COVID-19 pandemic. I encourage you as key stakeholders to engage with the National Food Systems Dialogues, participate in action tracks, and hold bold conversations as you discuss the impact of population and their influence on our food systems. After all, this is a Solution Summit too, and we'll be waiting for your ideas. The summit is a critical moment to catalyze ideas and action for people, planet, and shared prosperity. Let us seize it to define our future, the future of our children, and that of our planet. Thank you for inviting me.
Je remercie.
I thank the Secretary General Special Envoy for her statement. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, excellencies, it is now my honor to invite the Commission to hear a keynote address by Her Majesty Gyalum Sangay Choden Wangchuk, Queen Mother of Bhutan, UNFPA Goodwill Ambassador and recipient of the 2020 United Nations Population Award.
Mr. Chairman, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, members of the Commission, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you warm greetings and good wishes from Their Majesties the Kings, the Royal Government, and the people of Bhutan. It is a great honor and a privilege to address the 54th session of the Commission on Population and Development. I am confident that the objectives and goals of the Commission will be fulfilled under the dynamic leadership of the Chair, Ambassador Yemdiego Eric Tiar of Burkina Faso. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, global initiatives to advance women's rights, to promote their social and economic development have yielded significant results in the last 25 years since the ICPD. Maternal mortality has dropped by nearly half, and contraceptive use is higher than it has ever been. Expanded access to antiretroviral therapy and declining incidences of HIV infections has greatly reduced the number of HIV-related deaths. The introduction of the HPV vaccines has addressed the pertinent public health problem of preventable diseases such as cervical cancer and reduced the suffering caused by this disease. Furthermore, the global gender gap in education has narrowed. Women are rising to the top of their fields, and their political participation worldwide continues to grow. As we celebrate these achievements, we must recognize the challenges that remain. Too many women and girls around the world are still marginalized, living at or below the poverty line, with far too little control over their reproductive health and choices. Maternal mortality is still a leading cause of death, and gender equality and women's rights continue to remain a global issue. The COVID-19 pandemic has deepened and perpetuated inequalities and vulnerabilities for women and girls, highlighting gaps in policies and systems. The implementation of lockdowns has escalated domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and adolescent pregnancy. Healthcare systems have failed to provide reliable maternal and neonatal services. Additionally, loss of jobs, precarious economic situations, food scarcity, increased domestic work burden, parenting stress, and limited opportunities to seek help have led to poorer mental health outcomes among women and girls. The socio-economic impacts triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic clearly illustrate the connectedness of development concerns related to women. One broken link can threaten the whole chain of progress on women's issues. To shift the dynamics by 2030, we need to move beyond counting, quantification, and assessment efforts. Now is no longer the time to ask whether there is a problem. Now is the time for solutions. We need bold and courageous initiatives to inspire innovative actions to promote women's rights. The enormity of our challenge is to create a world in which women's equality is guaranteed, not granted. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the momentum created by the ICPD has deeply influenced development in my country, Bhutan. Our commitment to provide universal access to sexual and reproductive health services and advance the rights and choices for women and girls has brought about significant changes and visible impacts. Today, our women and girls are healthier, better equipped to plan their families, and are living longer. Skilled birth attendance remains high, and more than 90% of women opt to deliver in health facilities rather than their homes. We have achieved gender parity in primary and secondary education, and female literacy has likewise improved. Perceptions about gender roles are rapidly changing. More women are actively involved in social and development programs and taking up leadership roles. Our development philosophy of gross national happiness is at the center of all policies and programs. This index strives to include every woman, man, and child in the development process, where the happiness of the people should be the overarching measurement of a nation's progress. Economic growth is just one of the means to that end. It is the visionary leadership of His Majesty the King and the strength of Bhutan's commitment in government and civil society alike that has delivered such results for the people. While considerable strides have been made, we must admit that much more needs to be done. Access to quality health services that cater to women and girls' sexual and reproductive concerns requires greater attention as it impacts every aspect of their lives. Women in rural areas, in particular, face vulnerabilities and lack opportunities to access comprehensive health services. The country is increasingly facing emerging challenges for our youth. Unmet need for modern contraception is high among adolescents. 1/3 of all HIV infections are reported among 15 to 24-year-olds, and comprehensive knowledge on HIV/AIDS remains low in this age group. Gender-based violence remains pervasive in my country, as it is across the globe. I believe this to be one of the biggest barriers to peaceful and sustainable development. No effort must be spared to eliminate this evil. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year's theme, Population, Food Security, Nutrition, and Sustainable Development, comes at a critical time. On a global scale, the COVID-19 pandemic has had profound impacts on healthcare systems, food security, and gender equality. Without urgent action, hundreds of millions more will face poverty and hunger. Lack of access to nutritious food will have lifelong health and developmental consequences for children, pregnant and nursing mothers from the most vulnerable and low-income families. Bhutan has not been completely immune to the pandemic's tragic effects. Despite Bhutan's small population and developing economy, the lessons we have learned in mitigating the destructive consequences of the virus may have wide-reaching implications for countries that have been severely affected by the pandemic. By virtue of dynamic and compassionate leadership, our small, landlocked country has managed to make it through the pandemic relatively unscathed so far. Aggressive and early preparation along with a well-functioning health system, committed frontline workers, and open, honest, and transparent communication enabled the country to act swiftly and purposefully. This pandemic has highlighted the vulnerabilities of women and children, and precautions such as quarantine and lockdowns came with significant economic costs. However, this challenging time has also taught us the significance of multi-sectoral responses, combined efforts of all stakeholders, and the importance of placing people, especially vulnerable people, at the very center of our responses. Bhutan has successfully rolled out the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccinations to over 60% of her population with assistance from India. This gesture of goodwill from India is a shining example for the world to follow. It is imperative to ensure that vaccines are recognized as global public goods and that they are made equitably and fairly accessible to all countries. The pandemic is far from over, but we remain confident and resolute in our approach to leave no one behind. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, every member state has a stake in the discussions that will take place today. I am very optimistic that decisions taken will provide us with additional insights and inspire innovative actions to accelerate progress towards the ICPT Program of Action and SDGs. As you engage in critical conversation over the next few days, I encourage you to place the dignity of women and girls and compassion at the center of all responses. Global solidarity and your leadership is needed more than ever as you come together to address humanity's greatest challenges. I stand resolute and unwavering in my commitment to build a safer, happier, and compassionate world for our women, girls, men, and boys. I wish the 54th session of the Commission on Population and Development fruitful deliberations. I thank you for your attention. Thank you and Tashdile.
Je remercie.
I thank Her Majesty the Queen Mother of Bhutan for addressing the Commission. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the opening segment of the Commission at its 54th session. I will briefly pause the meeting to allow the podium to be rearranged. Kindly remain seated.
À présent, nous...
We will now turn to the first item on our agenda, namely election of officers. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now invite the Commission to turn its attention to item 1 of its provisional agenda, entitled Election of Officers. Delegations will recall that in his letter dated 17 July 2020, the chair of the Commission at its 53rd session advised that in accordance with ECOSOC decisions 2020/205, 2020/206, and 2020/19, the Commission had elected by correspondence the following members: me as chair, as well as Ms. Fidan of Turkey and Mr. Nizar Kadu of Lebanon were elected as vice chairs on the same date. Likewise, through the same correspondence, the chair of the 53rd session advised that the Commission had deferred the election of the remaining vice chairs from the other regional groups. I am pleased to inform you that since then, the following candidates have been nominated for the 2 outstanding positions of Vice Chair of the 54th session of the Commission. Ms. Cristina Popescu of Romania has been nominated from among the group of Eastern European states. Ms. Mayra Liseth Soto of El Salvador has been nominated from among the group of Latin American and Caribbean states. In the absence of any other candidate, may I take it that the Commission wishes to elect Ms. Cristina Popescu and Ms. Mayra Liseth Soto to serve as Vice Chairs of the Commission for its 54th session? I hear no objection. It is so decided. On behalf of the Commission, I would like to congratulate Ms. Popescu and Ms. Soto on their election.
Je saisis
I would like to take this opportunity to thank my fellow Bureau members for their very hard work and the support over the past months in preparing for this session of the Commission. Regarding the designation of a rapporteur for this session, following consultations in the Bureau, it has been agreed that Ms. Damla Fidan of Turkey, Vice Chair, will also assume the responsibilities of rapporteur for the 54th session. I congratulate Ms. Fidan on her appointment. I now invite the Commission to begin consideration of Agenda Item 2, entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Other Organizational Matters. I invite the Commission to first consider its annotated provisional agenda for this session as contained in document E/CN9/2021/1. The provisional agenda and the documentation for the 54th session were approved on the recommendation of the Commission at its 53rd session by the Economic and Social Council in its decision 2020/2021. Are there any comments by delegates on the provisional agenda? May I take it that the Commission wishes to adopt the provisional agenda as contained in document E/CN/2021/1? It is so decided, if I hear no objection.
J'invite maintenant
I now invite the Commission to turn its attention to the proposed organisation of work, as contained in document E/CN.9/2021/L1. As delegations are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impose limitations on the conduct of intergovernmental meetings at the United Nations headquarters. The Commission's session will thus have a hybrid format, and this includes in-person formal meetings, comprising the opening and closing meetings of the session, with the remaining meetings being held as informal meetings on a virtual interpretation platform. The draft programme of work before the Commission this morning was also introduced at the informal briefing I convened for delegations on the 10th of March on the preparations for the 54th session of the Commission. The arrangements described would only be applied as temporary measures during the extraordinary circumstances imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and would not in any way create a precedent to the work of the Commission. I am grateful to all Member States for the input provided through the Bureau and the flexibility shown in terms of carrying out our work under these challenging conditions. In order to make efficient use of the resources allocated to the Commission under the current circumstances, it is my intention to start all meetings on time and adjourn the meetings punctually. Inscription on the list of speakers for the general discussion under item 3, which will be conducted in informal virtual meetings, was opened on the 15th of March 2021 through the e-speakers module on the e-delegate portal. Delegations are reminded that the list of speakers under the item will close for inscription tomorrow, the 20th of April at 1 p.m. I would also like to remind delegations of the announced time limits for statements during the general discussion of agenda item 3 is as follows. 6 minutes for those speaking on behalf of a group of delegations. 4 minutes for those speaking in their national capacity. And 3 minutes for observers. Accredited non-governmental organisations are also invited to make statements, subject to the availability of time. I draw the Commission's attention to the informal logistics note prepared to support delegations' participation in the session, which was posted on the e-delegate portal on the 12th of March 2021. And it is available also on the Commission's website. Are there any comments on the proposals concerning the organisation of work before the Commission? I hear none. May I take it then that the Commission wishes to approve the draft organisation of work as contained in document E/CN.9/2021/L1 on the understanding that further adjustments may be made as warranted during the course of the session? I hear no objection. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, the Commission has concluded its programme of work for this morning. The Commission will reconvene this afternoon at 3 p.m. in a virtual setting to consider agenda item 3, entitled General Debate, and its sub-items A and B. To first hold an expert panel to introduce the reports of the Secretary-General under the item, followed by an interactive debate on the introductions made, after which statements in the general discussion will be heard. The informal virtual meeting will be conducted on a remote simultaneous interpretation platform and will be streamed live on the UN webcast. Delegations are requested to remain seated after the adjournment of this meeting for an important announcement, as well as actively managed departure protocols. The meeting is adjourned.
Mesdames les représentantes, messieurs les représentants, veuillez noter que le plan relatif.
Could you note that the security session work defines programme which will be used for an unfortunate eventuality, which we hope will be unlikely if a case of COVID-19 is detected. The Director of the Medical Service of the UN strongly encourages all member of a delegation who develops symptoms of COVID-19 or tests positive for COVID-19 in the over the next 14 days to contact the medical service at the email address osh@un.org. And this will be kept confidential. The United Nations Clinic will undertake normal contact tracing processes, which is entirely confidential, and no contact will be told who the case was. Testing can also be arranged through the UN clinic if required. I now invite the Secretary to manage the departure protocols. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to first invite the delegates seated in the first row in Conference Room 2, from Argentina to Bulgaria, to leave one by one. First row in Conference Room 1, from Chad to Croatia.